Hi, today in Financial Accounting, Chapter 1, Uses of Accounting Information and Financial Statements, we're going to look at Objective 4. In Objective 4, we're going to describe the corporate form of business organization and look at two other forms of business organization, one of which we've looked at in the past during the first semester of the school year. Let's look at three primary types of business structures. The first one, sole proprietors, we spent a great deal of time working with during the first semester of the school year. A sole proprietor is one owner. They own a business by themselves. They have unlimited responsibility and liability for that business. Within the United States today, the greatest number of actual businesses are formed or structured as sole proprietorships. Some benefits associated with forming a business as a sole proprietorship is that they're easy to start. As an individual, you get to make your own decisions. It's flexible. They're the least regulated structure of business. And then the owner gets to keep all of the profits. On the downside, however, the big one is unlimited liability. Meaning anything that happens to the business ultimately is the responsibility of that sole proprietor. If the business gets sued, the owner is sued. Additionally, the sole proprietor must make all the business decisions. They bear all the responsibility for that business. They can, of course, hire employees to help them with a workload. However, they must be responsible for any ultimate decisions that affect the business. So if I'm an owner of, say, an art gallery, I might be very artistic, but maybe I didn't spend a lot of time in school learning a lot about financial accounting and things of that sort. It wouldn't be a strength of mine because I'm very artistic. So I would still, as a sole proprietor, be ultimately responsible for all of those decisions. Additionally, the sole proprietor must find all the money to start that business, and any losses associated with that business would be their ultimate responsibility. Lastly, if as a sole proprietor I were to pass away and die, the business is essentially dissolved. The second type of business structure, or primary type of business structure, is a partnership. This is where two or more individuals own the business. Again, they have ultimate unlimited liability for that business. If something happens to that business, they bear that financial burden. This is the smallest number of U.S. businesses are formed as partnerships. On the positive side, some pros to being a partnership are that, again, they're still fairly easy to start. There is a little bit less more regulation than sole proprietors, but there's less regulation than corporations. Again, they're somewhat flexible. Another benefit to having a partner is that there might be more money available between the partners. So two partners might both bring funds to the table to get that business up and running and fund it during its startup periods. Additionally, there might be some more ideas coming to the table. Various different partners might bring different strengths to the table. So using my scenario from the sole proprietorship, let's say in my art gallery, instead of going into business by myself, I decided to get a partner. I'm very artistic, but maybe my partner is very money savvy, and so my partner might be responsible for maybe some of the financial pieces associated with the business, while I'm responsible for the art and management of the gallery itself. On the downside, we might have some disagreements amongst us, my partner and I. And then secondly, we still bear that ultimate unlimited liability. If the business gets sued, we are sued as well. Additionally, I have to share my profits with somebody else. And again, if one of the partners dies, ultimately that partnership is dissolved. The next type of business structure that we'll discuss is corporations. Corporations are where there are many owners. These owners take the form of stockholders. Additionally, these stockholders have limited liability. And the business is managed by a board of directors The largest volume of U.S. sales in sales dollars is associated with corporations. So most of your big businesses are structured as corporations. The positives of a corporation are that there's limited liability to the owners or stockholders. So what does that mean? If I invest $1,000 as a stockholder into a business and own shares of that business, my liability is only limited to that $1,000 of investment. I really can't lose more than that. So if the business itself is sued, I as an owner am not sued. The liability stops at the corporation itself, at the company itself. So that's the biggest positive associated with a corporation. Technically, it's a separate legal entity from me as a stockholder. There's more money for investment because there's more stockholders out there, so more people to invest in that business. Again, this corporation is a separate legal entity. The owners can change without interrupting the business, and therefore a corporation is said to have unlimited life. What do I mean by that? If I start out and I own shares of stock in a business that's formed as a corporation, I can at some point in time sell my shares of stock to somebody else. That business would continue to operate and function. The managers of the business, the board of directors, would continue to manage and run that business. It doesn't matter whether I own the stock or somebody else owns that stock. On the downside, however, the startup costs can be high associated with a corporation. And it can also be difficult and time-consuming. There's a lot of paperwork involved. Additionally, throughout the life of that corporation, there's a lot of laws and regulations that that particular corporation has to follow. In today's world, well, I've outlined 3 basic forms of corporate structure. In today's world, there are more than these basic forms of corporate structure. At this time, we will not be discussing them, but there are things that are variations of partnerships and corporations. These are called limited liability partnerships and limited liability corporations. They sort of blend together some of the concepts that I've tried to make very distinct here between these types of corporate structures. So I'd make you aware of these different items. However, we will not be going into detail on them in this chapter. So let's look at the corporate form of business structure. How does a corporation come into existence? Well, the first step is to file what we call an Articles of Incorporation. This is where a group of people file an application within a state in which they would like to incorporate. If the Articles of Incorporation is approved, it becomes the corporate charter, which is essentially a contract for that business to operate as outlined in the actual Articles of Incorporation themselves. An organization of a corporation consists of the following. First, it must have stockholders. These are owners of the corporation. The Articles of Incorporation will outline or state the initial number of shares that will be authorized for that particular corporation when it is formed. It will also indicate that there is a limit to the liability for each stockholder. It would be limited to the amount of that stockholder invests in that corporation. Secondly, there would be a board of directors. This board of directors is elected by the stockholders. They're the ones that set the corporate policy for that organization, and they ensure that management is doing their job on a day-to-day basis, whatever the objectives of that business are. So the board of directors basically sets the policy, and management, who are the employees essentially of that business, management runs the day-to-day operations. The management, they serve at the pleasure of the board for the actual running of the operations of the business. On this slide, we see a little pictorial figure that shows the relationship between the stockholders, board of directors, and management. Basically, the stockholders, they're the ones that invest, they're the owners, and they elect a board of directors. The board of directors determines the corporate policy, declares dividends for the corporation, and appoints management. Management executes the policy that's decided upon by the board and carries out the day-to-day operations to ensure that the goals and the policies of that corporation are achieved. Outside of the board of directors, there's an audit committee. There may be some members of the board that are involved in the audit committee, but they're generally people that are from outside the organization, and they ensure that there's an objective evaluation of management's performance. Generally speaking, the audit committee will engage an independent CPA firm to conduct an audit of the corporation's accounting records to ensure that all operations and financial reporting are being administered in the appropriate fashion and according to the law. So, how do corporations, sole proprietorships, and partnerships differ? Please, on your paper, describe how sole proprietorships, partnerships, and corporations differ. This concludes Objective 4 for Chapter 1, describing the different forms of business structure with a focus on corporations. Please review the functions of stockholders, the board of directors, and management of a corporation, and provide a description for the responsibilities of each in the sections below. Please click Submit when you're done with your answers.